And now, our feature presentation.
Hello, boils and ghouls. It's your old pal, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And my next guest had to give up an arm and a leg for this cameo. That's right, Mike the Birdman Ashby. Listen, Mike, I'm so glad that you have such a dark sense of humor. We have that in common, don't we?
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to ThisWeekInGeek.net's Loose Cannon. I am one of the Twig video store clerks today. I am Mike the Birdman, and welcome back to spooky season as we continue on going through the horror section of your local video store. But I've imported the district manager, David Louis Denoyer Escobar Lord Atreides, third of his name, from Welcome to Primetime, a Freddy's Nightmares podcast. Yes, Dave, it is exciting to have you back on the show. I was actually thinking, what can I do to draw out his name as long as I possibly can today?
You worked on it well.
So next week, I will have to one-up myself.
Absolutely.
So yes, guys, we are back here at Loose Cannon. This is the show which, if this is the first time you are listening to us, we've been doing the show for like 3 years. Where the hell have you been? But no, this is the show where we kind of talk about the things that have been left on the video shelf for any number of years. It may have been stuff you've passed by, lesser known blockbuster stuff that went to the theaters and flopped, stuff we're just really excited to talk about. We tend to shy away from stuff that's like super, super popular unless we have like a real opinion on it. And today's show was kind of came out of a conversation I had with Enrique and Dave after the show last week we recorded, which was, we talked about anthology horror movies. And I remember that these two got me listening to another podcast by listening to their podcast, which was, like I was mentioning, Welcome to Primetime, a Freddy's Nightmares podcast. And they mentioned a show called How Not to Make a Movie. And this is a podcast hosted by two film directors and film producers, Al Katz and Gil Adler. And these guys made the Tales from the Crypt seasons 3 and 4. What's
3 through 7.
3 through 7, yeah. So these guys had a huge run on that series. They also were involved in Freddy's Nightmares. And they talk about their experiences making one of the films we're going to be talking about today, and that is Tales from the Crypt. We're going to be talking about Demon Night, Bordello of Blood, and a movie I didn't know that existed until last week, Ritual.
Yeah. Ritual is one of those that I remember when I first found it on DVD at like one of my swap shops back in the day. And I was like, what? There's another Tales from the Crypt movie? And of course, we'll get into it exactly on how that movie was made. But I'll go ahead and say that I don't think Ritual is technically a bad movie. I don't think it's a good movie, but for it having that Tales from the Crypt branding, even though it has some very interesting opening Crypt Keeper segments, still pretty watchable flick in my opinion.
Yeah, totally. So as we often do off the top of the show, we actually talk about how we found each of these movies. And I guess it all starts by talking about how we found Tales from the Crypt. And for mine, it actually goes, I saw the movie first, Demon Night, and I randomly caught episodes of Tales from the Crypt on pirate television. So going all the way back to the 90s, because I turned 42. Well, as of this recording, I turned 42 last week. So now
happy belated birthday again.
Thank you. So I'm old as shit. So once upon a time, I used to have one of those huge satellite dishes that sat in my backyard. And I remember watching Tales from the Crypt on a random station that would show Tales from the Crypt and the latest episode of The X-Files And then it would randomly broadcast the Fox Saturday morning cartoon lineup.
That's a hell of a lineup.
Yeah, so if I was willing to stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning, I could watch X-Files and Tales from the Crypt, wait an hour, and then I could watch Bobby's World, Power Rangers, Batman, Eek the Cat, X-Men, Silver Surfer, and some other things. And it was kind of awesome because then I could sleep in, and then my mom, or my grandmother rather, would take me to my local Cineplex, give me $10 and tell me to fuck off for the afternoon.
Absolutely.
Word for word. And then Demon Knight is a movie I remember renting with my best friend at the time, Ryan. And we used to have sleepovers in high school because we're dorks and losers.
I totally get it.
But I remember there used to be this video store in his little hometown, and it was a place called the Emporium. And I remember this for two reasons. One, it had an astounding selection for a town of like 500 people. Whoever ran that place was clearly a movie buff. And they also had the most amazing homemade submarine sandwiches.
Oh
yes. My God.
Yes.
We used to do Friday night sleepover. So we'd rent a couple of movies. We'd play Sega Genesis till like 6 o'clock in the morning. And we'd watch like a horror movie or an action movie or something. But we rented Demon Knight because it was the new hotness. We weren't old enough to go see this at our local Cineplex. And watching this was just kind of awesome because I'd never seen anything horror comedy outside of Freddy Krueger at that time. It just wasn't on my radar. Most of the horror I'd seen would be like, I guess the closest thing I'd seen the horror comedy in the early 90s would have been probably the later Nightmare on Elm Street, some of the later Friday the 13th. Yep. And this was just before Scream, which was sort of meta funny. But
yeah, absolutely.
Demon Knight was something totally new to me. And then, like I said, I discovered Tales from the Crypt a little bit later on. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I recognized one of the actors from it, Billy Zane, who plays an astounding bad guy.
Yes, he does.
Like,
God, the Collector is one of the like horror icon villains that does not get enough acclaim, in my opinion. Billy Zane just chews the scenery in this movie, but he does it in a way that just feels natural to the character.
I had this thought last night while I was rewatching these movies, which, by the way, there are special editions from Scream Factory, which you should 100% pick up. I like Billy Zane, and I got to thinking, I was looking at him because I was randomly flipping through memes on Facebook, and I saw a meme of Arnold Vosloo, and I'm thinking,
I know exactly where you're going.
And I'm like, you're like the Walmart brand of this guy.
Yeah.
And I got to thinking, Billy Zane, if they ever did another G.I. Joe live action movie, if they couldn't get Arnold Vosloo to come back as Zartan, Billy Zane wouldn't be a half bad choice.
No, he wouldn't.
So, ultimately, listen, I loved it. I think this was my first William Sadler movie.
Oh, wow.
And this is definitely my first Jada Pinkett Smith movie. And I was watching this last night, and there was something I had in my head. I wish she had done more action type movies because I forgot that I'd seen this up until fairly recently, and I got to thinking, what else have I seen her in? I forgot she was in the two Matrix movies and the Matrix video game as Niobe, captain of the Logos. She played Morpheus's ex-girlfriend, and then in Matrix Resurrections, she plays Counselor Niobe, and she basically controls Zion. And I was thinking, wow, she's come such a long way. And obviously, to say nothing of the personal things she's had in the news kind of recently.
Yeah.
But I was just like, I wish I'd seen you in more stuff because she's honestly a pretty fantastic actress and underappreciated as an action heroine as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially with Demon Knight in regards to her character, is just one of the best genesises of a character's arc because you start out with her as basically being the servant to CCH Pounder's character, and it's mainly because like she's clearly on probation for something that she's done, and then you have Breaker Sadler's character come in and basically shake up the mold to where it's like, oh, by the way, you're going to take my place because you're chosen, even though you didn't realize this. Like somebody that's clearly had a hard life and then gets taken at knife point by Breaker at one point when all the hell breaks loose. And then at the very end is our hero. Like, I mean, like that is so cool for the genesis of that story arc, but also she does it so freaking well.
So how did you first come across Tales from the Crypt and then Demon Knight?
So I'm trying to think in regards to age-wise. So Tales from the Crypt was something I was aware of because in regards to the Crypt Keeper, I have one distinct memory. My father and I would go to flea markets all the time here in Ohio growing up. He would take me to, we've easily got 6 flea markets within like an hour's drive of us, whichever direction you go. And I remember there was one that used to be in Piqua, which is our connecting our sister city, that had a giant cardboard cutout of the Crypt Keeper on his throne. And it was easily the promo shot, I believe, from like the series beginning art. I'm 90% sure it was used as promotion because I've seen it on the videotapes. And again, I was super young, so I don't remember exactly all the details to it, but I'm 90% sure it's like it had to be a promo like at like a cable station or like when they went on VHS and had like a release form. Like it was the coolest thing. And in hindsight, I really wish I would have bought it, but I had no idea at that point. But anyway, Tales from the Crypt was something I knew about because of the Crypt Keeper, because as stupid as it is, but this is pure honesty, you see the Crypt Keeper in a children's film in the 90s, which was Casper, because Bill Pullman's character at one point turns into the Crypt Keeper. So I had seen the Crypt Keeper from that, but then also knew about Tales from the Crypt. But my first introduction to Tales from the Crypt, as far as like actually getting hands on it and watching it, was I was lucky enough to have been a kid in the 90s, a very young kid, because I was born in 92, mind you. But I got to see Tales from the Crypt on Sci-Fi. Sci-Fi Channel here in the U.S. Picked up Tales from the Crypt and would air episodes, usually late at nights, but there were times when I got into my teens that it wasn't uncommon to catch it on in the afternoon. But I distinctly remember the first time I watched Tales from the Crypt because it was the very first episode, which is And All Through the House, because I remember the Crypt Keeper coming in with a Santa mask. And for some reason, that always just kind of stuck with me and like was unnerving. Not to mention that happened to be also the night that unfortunately my sister and I got into a fight while I was watching Tales from the Crypt and ended up breaking the remote and got in trouble for both breaking the remote and watching Tales from the Crypt at a young age on the same night. But I digress. In regards to Demon Knight, Cable was how I found out about Demon Knight, because I knew about Tales from the Crypt, but did not know about the feature films until one day, you know, you're a kid, you're flipping through the TV Guide channel and you're like, oh, Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, or you're just channel surfing and come across it. And I remember the very first scene I ever saw of Demon Knight was where Cordelia's character eats, what is his name?
Wendell or something?
Something like that. Let me check here. It's the guy that plays the voice of Roger Rabbit, Wally. Charles Fleischer. So Cordelia eats Roger Rabbit, which I didn't know that was Roger Rabbit at the time, so it wasn't a big deal. But I remember seeing that, but also seeing the build-up, because I caught it right as Billy Zane was talking to her after Lyle, a.k.a. Thomas Hayden Church. I call him Lyle because that's how I knew him from George of the Jungle, because, again, I was a kid. Talks really shitty to her and then leaves, and then that's when Billy Zane swoops in and he's like, you know, you deserve love, you could have love, and all this stuff. And then flash forward to seeing this group of people in this house hiding out from these demons, and then see them storm into this room, and she's just straight up eating him. So as a young kid, that scene left an impression, so naturally I got very curious about the rest of the film. I'm not even 100% sure I watched all of it at that one sitting, but I watched it on cable so much growing up that, again, going back to my uncle who I talked about the previous episode, who would burn stuff for me, he ended up burning both Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood for me because I asked, because when he made me those DVDs, they were super not not rare, but they were not easy to come by in like a store. Like you had to order those or just know where to go to find them, which was probably Best Buy here in the States at that point. And so once he gave me Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood, I mean, I cannot tell you, Birdman, how many fucking times I've seen these movies, but they are an absolute comfort film. And what I absolutely love about Demon Knight is, and I put it on my list, as you know, for my number one October essential horror film. It has nothing to do with Halloween, but this is 100% a Halloween movie to me because it has monsters, it's got heroes, it's got scares, it's got jokes, it's got all kinds of atmosphere. Even though there's not a single pumpkin or anything in it, this is a Halloween movie for me every freaking time. So it's one of those movies, along with Bordello as well, I can literally put on any time. Demon Knight has always been a quintessential film for me because I always have fun with it. It's the perfect runtime. And you have an amazing cast. You have amazing creature effects and special effects in general. I mean, what freaking 13-year-old kid wouldn't latch on to Demon Knight, to be honest?
Oh, yeah. Like, it's actually because of the list you did on Weekly Spookies a couple of weeks ago, which is why I chose to show this to my wife prior to this recording. I was thinking, I want something she hasn't seen because my horror game has changed dramatically since I became friends with you and Enrique.
Yeah.
And I wanted something that was accessible, that because my wife said she likes 90s horror. So right now she's currently watching the I Know What You Did Last Summer series.
Oh, nice.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And
are you talking about the Amazon series?
No, she watched the original
films.
too, and I'm not a big fan of those. But
I like I Know. Enrique and I recently did, and I say recently, it's been like 3-4 years ago at this point. But we watched I Know and I Still Know back to back, and I appreciate I Still Know, but that movie's got some serious problems with its story and overall just development.
Oh yeah, 100%. So she said she wanted something very, very specific. So I'm thinking, you know what? Demon Knight kind of checks off a lot of those things, whereas I like monsters and really awesome practical effects. I figure, okay, this is accessible. And I said to her, think of it as a higher budget, more ridiculous episode of Supernatural.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay, sure, I'll give it a whirl. And she's like, it's not something I'd watch again, but I'm glad that I saw it. And you know what? As far as I'm concerned, that's not bad.
That's a win. No, that's absolutely a win.
So why don't you sum up the plot for Demon Knight, and then we will just talk about the wonderfulness that was this movie.
I would be happy to. So we are talking about Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight from 1995. This film is directed by Ernest Dickerson, who is a very well-known director in regards of his films that I love, especially like Surviving the Game. I mean, he's a man that did Juice. He was a cinematographer on Do the Right Thing, on Malcolm X. Ernest Dickerson is one of those guys that is has a filmography and just a body of work that you really need to look into if you're not familiar with him, because he's got hands at a lot of things that people don't realize. But Demon Knight is the story of three. Well, actually, we'll start with two people that are basically starting out with a chase. You have William Sadler, who is a breaker, and then you have Billy Zane, who is the collector. One thing happens, and they're chasing each other. They end up getting into a really insane car crash, which is one thing I always forget about watching this movie. That opening car stunt is absolute insanity. That crash and those flames is something that you really have to see to hold on to. Anyway, they get into a crash, and Breaker gets free. He ends up finding himself, with the help of Dick Miller, into this little hotel that is run by CCH Pounder, and you find out that Billy Zane is what they call the collector, and he is trying to get this key back from Breaker that contains what we believe to be the blood of Jesus Christ, essentially, or someone of that nature, that is the prevention of all hell breaking loose on the earth. It contains the blood. It can protect them from demons. Billy Zane goes to collect it. All hell breaks loose, and he loses, and he decides, you know what? This property is hereby condemned. One of my favorite lines from him. And he summons demons that basically invade this space. They surround every area. They get into the building. And Breaker has this blood that will protect them as he places it in doorways, stairways that will keep the demons out. And through the movie, you have a list of like, what is it? Like 7 people, right? Because he says at one point, like 7 people have to gather. So 7 different characters, each has a different personality. You got Dick Miller, you got Thomas Hayden Church, you got CCH Pounder, you got Jada Pinkett Smith, you've got Richard Fleischer, who was the voice of Roger Rabbit, Dick Miller, as I mentioned before. I mean, there is just a cast of characters in this. And slowly through the process of Billy Zane fucking with their minds, giving them temptations, all this stuff, he invades the space, and you find out that at the very end, Jada Pinkett Smith, who is somebody, like I mentioned earlier, that's on probation, is going to be the next savior that takes Breaker's place when Breaker unfortunately passes. And so she has to stand up to Billy Zane. She absolutely does brilliantly, which I'm sure we'll get into. And you leave the movie having been rattled with monsters, explosions, laughs, gore, everything you can think of. And Jada Pinkett Smith is left to save the world from future collectors, which we may or may not meet at the end credits, which is one thing I always love.
Yeah, and the other collector gag, there's something she does right at the end of it, just as she's getting on the bus to go travel the world to just be on the run from this thing, because that's what her life is now transformed into.
Yeah.
She places a drop of the blood on the seal of the doors, and the collector just happens to be waiting at the side of the highway, and it's played by a different actor now.
Yeah.
Who is Mark David Kennerly, and he looks so familiar, but I can't place him from where.
I'm gonna have to look up his filmography, because I did the same thing when I was watching it earlier today. Yeah, to give you perspective, Birdman, I binged all 3 of these while I was at work today, because it was one of those things where I was in processing at work, and also I've seen these movies so many times, minus Ritual, that I can listen to them and see exactly what is happening.
Like, there's just something about the way he looks up at the bus driver, he looks at the door,
Yeah,
he looks side to side, he's like, I'll catch the next one.
I'll catch the next one. So good.
It's like, the thing about Demon Knight that works so well is it plays with tone and atmosphere, I think, in a really fun way, where somebody could get their face ripped off, an arm gets ripped off at one point, or just all this wacky horror stuff can happen at any moment. But there's some genuine moments in this where it switches gears. Like when you're talking about the Cordelia scene where the collector is seducing and manipulating her mind. That scene has stuck with me for decades. And it's not just because she's a sexy, attractive woman. It's the way Billy Zane's intonation plays with that scene. And there's some really unique camera work. And I don't know whether I'm reading too far into this, but there's a moment where there's a light cast across her, and it's really close up against her cheek. It's this really, really, really soft light. And then it cuts down to the collector standing outside of this hotel / former church that they're holed up in.
Yeah.
And he's in this almost holy circle of light. And as you were saying earlier, he's like, you deserve love. Whore is such a ugly word. You're a beautiful girl. And she's just falling into it. It's just the way that scene plays.
Well, and I think it's honestly important to bring up, too, one thing that we neglected is that Cordelia is a sex worker. She is basically the prostitute of this hotel, because at one point, there's 2 keystone cops in this movie, even though one actually does hold his own for a little bit longer than the other one. But the chief of police comes in, and at one point, Cordelia and Thomas Hayden Church are in the same room together, and she has a car battery hooked up to his nipples, which is a hilarious scene, because the cop comes in, busts them, and they have their hands up, and he's like, my nipples are smoking. I always love that line. But anyway, he, as Cordelia and Thomas Hayden Church, which is Roach, I love that freaking name for his character, too, because he absolutely is one. They're walking down the steps, and he's like, sorry to mess with you folks. We'll get you back to your personal business in a minute. I'm sure it was personal business, Cordelia, like calling out that he's busted her before. And Cordelia is the love interest of Wally, who I mentioned is Charles Fleischer. And that's how they honestly introduced the setting of this hotel. Is Cordelia's talking to Wally. Wally's a postal worker that recently got fired. and you can tell that she likes him, but also understands her profession, because at one point she asks CCH Pounder, she's like, "You think I should give him a free one?" And he's like, "Oh, then you just be screwing him both ways," because he's gotten fired. And it's so funny in regards to the dialogue. But yeah, that scene with Cordelia and Billy Zane, which, to give perspective on Billy Zane at this point, a lot of people do not realize in watching this that Demon Knight is before Titanic. Like, this is before he's a villain, because from this point he's appeared in Silence of the Hams, which is not one that a lot of people know. But in '93 he was in Tombstone. He had a brief appearance in that. He was in the Western Posse in '93 as well. He's been
Shadow,
on Twin
right?
Peaks. No, the Phantom, which is after
Phantom,
this.
Yeah.
What a lot of people remember him for at this point is a villain, which is Dead Calm, where he plays the psychotic between Nicole Kidman and the guy from Jurassic Park. I'm blanking on his name right now. Oh god, I gotta click on the movie. Give me a second here. Let's see. It is
the guy who plays
Sam
Dr.
Neill.
Sam
Neill. My god, I can't believe I forgot that. But yeah, he was the psychotic in Dead Calm, which is another film I recommend. Other than that, Critters and Back to the Future 2 are like other two big points on his resume. So he does this, and then 3 years later is going to do Titanic, where he plays a villain, not of the same nature, of course, but we get to see him love what he's doing in this movie, because there's no way he did not have fun with this role.
Oh yeah, like there's something about the energy and just the way that he is in every scene. Like I've said this on previous podcasts before, and I don't know, I'm really starting to wonder if I'm able to pick up when somebody is improving, because there's just this vibe to it, and it's just got this manic energy, and the director's like, you know what, if it plays for the character and the writers are cool with it, just run with it. Because the way he delivers, there's one point where he's outside and he's just freaking, he's like, God damn shit, fuck you motherfuckers just had to do one thing.
I have the whole line memorized, because I've never forgotten it. You humans, you're not worth the flesh you're printed on. Fuck this cowboy shit. You fucking ho down, well done, there, motherfuckers. Like, oh my god, he says ho down, po dunk, well them there, motherfuckers. All you had to do was give me the goddamn key, and we could just go on with our lives. But no, this property is hereby condemned, and he just cuts his hand open, invites the demons in. No, Billy Zane is absolutely one of the number one reasons to watch this movie, because I feel like he's one of those actors that people know from big movies, but the dude has like 160 credits on IMDb. He is a working actor because he's good, and also he loves to work.
And he has such range too, because
he absolutely does.
Like, he's got comedy, he can do serious, he can be a dramatic villain, he can be a comedic villain, he can be a hero. Like, I loved him in The Phantom. In fact, I would love to talk about lesser known superhero movies at some point on the show.
We could absolutely do that. I actually just 2 years ago for the first time watched The Shadow, and I didn't like love it, but I really, really dug on parts of it, and overall just the world that it creates, which is the same thing with The Phantom, although I grew up with The Phantom. I love The Phantom. But no, I mean, Billy Zane is one of those actors that really just embodies whatever he has to. If he's going to be a superhero, he's going to be a hero. If he's going to be an asshole and then kind of have a story arc that changes his heart, but also isn't completely redeeming of him, in like Titanic, he nails that. He nails it every time. I love him on The Boys, and he has a bit role in The Boys where he appears in Pop Claw's one superhero movie that she did. But the scene he did, I remember Billy Zane in it because I love Billy Zane, and he just is one of those actors where when you give him something that he can really attach onto, you're going to see an amazing performance, which is what you have here in Tales from the Crypt. And going back to the scene of him and Cordelia, I've seen this scene, like I said, at least over 20 times. And today was the first time I, for some reason, realized when he puts his hand up, you see her tears be wiped away, even though he's outside the window.
Oh, I missed that.
Yeah. So she's crying because, of course, Roach has just called her a whore and, said whores don't have friends. And so, she's crying. She's really feeling down. And then Zane comes in and he's like, poor Cordelia, which also the thing with this scene is his voiceover. Mm-hmm. Because it is so smooth jazz radio, like easy listening, that I would love to have this as like my freaking outgoing voicemail. It's like, David isn't here right now. he deserves better, you know. Like just like it's just one of those things that is just so funny every time I look back on it. But yeah, again, like I pick up things on this scene every time, but more so I pick up things on his performance every time. And that is just a great demonstration of the range he has, as you said, but also we get to see him go from 0 to 100 real quick in this with his first kill, which is him driving a fist through the main cop's head. Like punches straight through his head, takes it off, is punching people with the severed head still attached to his hand, and then throws it to the other cop at one point and says, "Heads up!" Like, goddamn, Billy Zane! Like this is a prime performance that really is like in my top 5 favorites of his, if not like top 5. Like, I mean, this is absolutely prime Billy Zane.
Another performance that I wish I'd seen more of him, because I know him mostly as a supporting actor.
Yeah,
is William Sadler.
Yeah, Sadler,
great lead.
Sadler is so good. I mean, he going back over his filmography as I've like watched his movies and stuff over the year. You said this was the first thing you saw him in. To date my age a little bit, I think Green Mile was one of the first things I saw him in, because I'll be honest, I saw Green Mile a long time before I saw Shawshank Redemption. Like I saw Green Mile single digits, and I saw Shawshank when I bought it at a flea market because it was one of those that I'd always heard about but had never seen, and then watched it. And I mean, that another movie I can throw on at any time. I know that's like everybody's favorite, like top favorite perfect movie, whatever you want to call it, but like Shawshank Redemption is another great performance by Sadler. But yeah,
I forgot he was Death in Bill and Ted.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's the first thing I saw him in. Now that is fucking range.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a great example too of going back to Tales from the Crypt. He's in one of the first episodes, which is The Man Who Was Death, which is the second episode, I want to say. I'm 90% sure it is. Let me double check though. Now I'm curious. But yeah, he plays a villain right in his first introduction of Tales from the Crypt, and completely steals that episode because of how psychotic. I mean, he can't steal it because he's the main character, but just he is so psychotic but also charismatic in that episode. And you just get to a point where it's like, oh, I mean, he needs to die, but at the same time, like, oh, he's so damn likable.
Oh yeah, like there's something about Tales from the Crypt actors and actresses that they know exactly how to pull different performances out of, you know, stuff that they don't normally do. Like I was actually just thinking about this while like we were talking. The first episode of Tales from the Crypt I saw was an episode, I don't recall precisely what happens, but I remember 2 big things that stuck with me. George Wendt from Cheers was in it.
Yes.
And somebody gets stuffed. Like they turn into like a taxidermied person or something.
Yeah, collection completed. Now I don't believe Wendt is in that episode, and Emmett Walsh is.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He's the main in that one. Yeah, collection completed, which is, I believe, the last episode of season 1, because there's only 6 episodes, because I was wrong. Man Whose Death, which is the Sadler episode, is number 1. All Through the House is episode number 2, so I flipped them. So the Psychotic Santa episode that also was done in the 70s film is the second episode. And then, yeah, Sadler opens up the series of Tales from the Crypt with a amazing story about a guy that's an executioner for he runs the electric chair at a prison. And I mean, he's so damn charismatic, but also just so psychotic, and like you lose touch with him about midpoint through the episode when he kind of just starts picking people off as he does. But at the same time, like, yeah, I mean, he steals that episode. And I mean, it just goes back again to the casting of this film that works for it so much. And going back to Billy Zane as well, I always forget, you had mentioned that this has an amazing release from Shout Factory through the Scream Factory label. At one point, this movie was in serious trouble because they had sent over this script that had all these demons in it and everything. And when they got it back from the studio, the approved script, the demons were now guys with sunglasses, like men in suits, like Men in Black. And there were no demons in a movie called Demon Knight.
That's so lame.
I know,
and the fact
dude.
they thought that they could get away with that. I mean,
oh yeah.
I mean, that plays on television but that does not play on a major motion picture. Like,
No.
I just want to see. So this movie came out in January, which is admittedly the death slot for a lot of movies.
The dumping ground for movies is January.
But, you know, it's got a major thing behind it. It was, you know, a major IP attached to it at that time.
Yeah.
You can't pull guys in fucking sunglasses. Come on.
Yeah. No, it like if you have that edition, that documentary on it is super interesting because they go into a lot of stuff. But I think honestly what I love most about Demon Knight is it is exactly what you expect from a Tales from the Crypt Presents movie, but it's almost like they didn't have to go this hard, but they did for us. And again, you know, you mentioned that Gil and Al have been on our podcast, which we may or may not be having them back soon, and I cannot wait. But anyway, the story that they just tell in regards to this movie and how what a joy it was and how proud of it they are, you can see it on the film. And I mean, it's hilarious too because I actually, like I said, was watching it earlier today. They're freaking in the movie, and I never realized until today. When Crypt Creeper at the end says, "Oh, it looks like my producers are giving me final cut." You have Alan Katz on the right side that motions to the guillotine.
I thought
they're
so.
Holding the string. Yeah, this was the first time, Birdman, that I actually saw them, and I literally texted Henrik because I took screen caps on my phone, and I was like, "Holy shit, they're in the movie!" And I just realized it. And then also I was like, they may have mentioned that on how not to make a movie podcast, but it's so fun to see that. And that's what I love about this movie is anytime you watch it, I feel like you can take away something different or notice something different about it that just makes it spot on to be a perfect Halloween film, a perfect horror film, a perfect Tales from the Crypt film. I mean, this is absolutely one that I have a particular story for because we were at Henrik's Halloween party, Enrique's Halloween party. This has been probably like 6-7 years ago. And we've talked, we've eaten candy, we've eaten food, like we've all hung out. And usually Enrique ends his parties by picking a movie, if not two on some occasions. But he always tries to go for something that A, people haven't seen, or B, that he really, really finds underappreciated that is a great movie. And he really isn't wrong most of the time. I say most of the time, but I honestly don't think there's ever been a bad one. He couldn't figure out a movie to put on for this party. And then somebody suggested Demon Knight. And he was like, wait a minute. And then at midnight at his Halloween party, we are sitting back on the 120-inch screen watching Demon Knight and having an absolute fucking blast. Because how can you not have a blast with a bunch of people, friends, and drinks and just hang out and watch this movie?
Yeah, like it's one of these things that I'm surprised at the time it wasn't more well received. I'm just reading some of the Wikipedia stuff on it.
Yeah.
And according to wikipedia.com, Rotten Tomatoes, a review aggregator reports that 39% of 36 surveyed critics gave the film a positive review. The average rating is 4.6 out of 10. Did we see the same fucking movie?
I mean, it's so funny sometimes to go back and read those reviews from original theatrical releases. And those critics, some of them really have a stick up their ass, especially about horror films. And that's honestly one thing that I kind of appreciate about being somebody that's on Letterboxd, but also having been in an age that, like, we have critics, but they do not matter as much as they used to in regards of, like, being featured in a lot of newspapers and, like, you know, Roger Ebert says, go see such and, like, unfortunately, you know, he's passed as a great example. It's like a lot of them have passed. Anybody can be a critic now. And it's so funny that when you have certain voices that you go back to, and then some of them will actually revisit it and say they're wrong, which Ebert did on multiple films that he took back his original review and would change. And it's so funny that you say that in regards to the whole thing of, you know, did we watch the same movie? I think that's one of the things that I've honestly enjoyed about getting older and watching the movies that I loved as a kid. They are still your favorites for the most part, but the reason changes. And I think especially with Demon Knight, the reason changes for me every time I watch it. But I just love everything about this movie.
Yeah, like there's so much about Demon Knight that I appreciate. Like I said, as I've gotten older, its atmosphere, its lighting, its performances. As a kid, it had just ultra violence, great special effects. And now that I've been a media content consumer and commentator for like 16 years, I appreciate it through different eyes. And now that I've listened to how not to make a movie, I look at movies a little bit differently. And just being friends with you and Enrique over the course of the last year or so, I look at horror movies especially a little bit kind of different now. I've always been a fan, but now I'm looking at them through not necessarily a more critical eye or rose-colored glasses eye, just more of a enthusiast. I can still recognize when something sucks, but I can find the joy in something. And I find as I'm getting older, I'm embracing the joy of what is on the screen, because ultimately a lot of the movies that we love, that was a passion project to somebody. And when you can find the same passion that they had to make it or didn't have at the time, which we'll get into, you find something kind of magical, which unfortunately our next movie we're going to talk about is Tales from the Crypt, Bordello of Blood. This one, I remember my recollection with this movie, again, starts out at my friend's house, little town of 500 people, going down to the Emporium and renting this. And again, very memorable VHS cover for this with the Crypt Keeper. You see the girl with her legs up, kind of like The Graduate sort of thing. And, you know, he's in the middle of it. And Tales from the Crypt. Cool. Another horror movie. There's vampires.
Yeah.
I seem to recall a fairly extensive television ad campaign for this. And it was everywhere. And it was like, oh my God, there's Dennis Miller. There's this hot redhead, Angie Everhart. Cool. Neat. And getting this movie, watching it, I feel like such a fucking teenage boy saying this. The scene that I remember the most from this movie is where the character of Lilith, played by Angie Everhart, gets into Dennis Miller's head. And she's trying to fuck with him, and she says, "Perhaps you like this, perhaps you like that.
Do it for me. Do it for me. Deliver.
2,
Here we go.
4, 6, 8. You can watch me masturbate." And I'm like,
yeah.
Oh God. And that had stuck with me for 30 years.
Yeah.
And watching it last night, I'm thinking, okay, you're still hot, but this is weird looking back through the lens of nostalgia. I remember you looking a lot hotter when I was like 15 or 16, but again, the movie itself, and now that I've listened to the podcast, How Not to Make a Movie, and just learning the nightmare production that went on with this movie, Dennis Miller, just the fact that he was ad-libbing 99% of his scenes, some of it genuinely kind of funny. If I was the editor, they'd never find the body. Just because, my God. So, Dave, how was your first experience with this? And then sum this one up.
All right. So, Bordello of Blood was one that I distinctly remember becoming aware of because I was a young kid, and growing up with my family, I watched a lot of Comedy Central here in the U.S. They love Saturday Night Live. They loved a lot of the movies they showed. That's how I saw movies like Trading Places, Beetlejuice. Like, these movies were regular mainstays on Comedy Central that people don't think about. And that was how I got a lot of my comedy love that my parents have that has bled onto me, but also, I mean, they're great films too. I digress. I remember specifically that one Halloween when I was probably like 6, 7, 8, they had a campaign going, and they showed the Crypt Keeper popping out of his coffin and doing the like at the beginning of the Tales from the Crypt intro. And I was like, oh my God, like I want to watch that. Like, what is that? And so being the kid that I had access to like our TV Guide and the TV Guide channel, I found out that it was a movie called Bordello of Blood. Well, I was not very censored as a kid for the most part, but when it came to TV stuff, because there was only one TV in the house at that point besides the VHS TV combo in my parents' room, it wasn't super easy to sneak stuff as a kid and watch it unless, like, you know, I had to get up like late at night and do it. So I remember that I told my mom I wanted to watch Bordello of Blood one night when we were all hanging out in the family room, and she's like, we're not watching that. Like, no, like, that's not happening. And I was like, but like, I really want to see that. And she's like, that's a like, if you want to see it, put it on a VHS tape, let me watch it, and then you can watch it.
Oh my God.
And I necessarily did not do the VHS tape, but what I did was I would pop into Mom's room the rest of that week and let her know when Bordello of Blood was on. And so it was a combination of me annoying her to the point where she was like, okay, we'll watch this, but like at the first time, the first sight, it's not for you, we're turning it off. So to give you perspective, I saw the intro, I saw Corey Feldman, and then I have no memory of the movie because I'm pretty sure that I had to leave the room at that point. So I didn't see Bordello of Blood in full until I was like, again, in my teens, and Comedy Central, Sci-Fi USA showed this movie all the fucking time. And it got to a point where it was not uncommon for me to come home and watch Bordello of Blood on the TV. But because I was a kid in school, because like, you know, it was one of those movies that I'd seen and kind of knew about, so I wasn't like super excited about it, but it was still cool. I never really watched all of it. I would catch it in pieces all the fucking time. So I remember distinctly at one point catching it at the squirt gun scene and watching it to the end. I remember literally catching it at the end when they're stabbing Lilith through the heart with the guitar and watching it to the end, which is only, 10 minutes at that point. I remember catching it in the middle where he goes to take the pictures of the corpses and they're not there. Like, I remember watching this movie in so many bits and pieces that I can't recall the first time I watched it complete, except for, again, when my uncle had given me that bootleg copy of the burn of the DVD. And that was when I saw it for the first time, honestly, to my knowledge. So I've seen Bordello of Blood through my life in bits and pieces that I'm actually recalling right now that it's like, my God, I've seen this movie in chunks to the point where I maybe have seen it in chunks more than I've actually seen it complete. And I've seen it complete a lot. But I always have distinct memories of those scenes, just turning it on right at that point or catching it when I did. And Bordello of Blood is essentially the story of, you start out with the fact that you have Corey Feldman, who is the brother to, I always forget her name, Erica Elienak, who works for this church. And Corey Feldman's a troublemaker. One night he's at the bar with his buddies and they're like, man, we're having fun. We're shooting each other in the dick with darts. And we're hitting on bartenders. And then this one guy's like, hey, you guys want to get laid? I know where you can go. And he gives them the address for a mortuary and tells them to ask for the Cunningham Wake. They go to the Cunningham Wake, and lo and behold, it's run by vampires, one of which is Lilith, which is the vampire that we open with when an amazing performance by Phil Fondacaro goes on an expedition, gets the heart of Lilith, puts it back in Lilith, and brings her back to the States. Now she runs a brothel. And Erica Elienak realizes that her brother's missing. She goes to the police, but the police aren't helping. But Dennis Miller happens to be reading a newspaper in the lobby, who is Rafe Gutman. And he says, I'll take on the case. And he does, with the help of Chris Sarandon, who is a preacher that Erica Elienak works for. And what happens essentially is you find out that Rafe has to figure out that this brothel is inside this mortuary and what's going on. He does. Him and Elienak end up saving the day. Hijinks ensue. I freaking love this movie.
When I was watching it last night, and again, I have not seen this movie since the 90s.
Yeah.
So going back and rewatching this and listening to Al and Gil's podcast within the last couple of months, I got thinking, oh man, this movie's gonna suck.
Yeah.
And it's not as bad as I thought it would be. I actually really enjoyed it. Do I enjoy it as much as Demon Knight? No, but there are some great performances in this movie. Like, again, Dennis Miller, despite the fact that Gil and they must have wanted to shoot this guy every day he was on set.
Oh, it's really, really bad when you listen to that show and you get to hear what a person Miller was at that point. And to be honest, I think from what I've both heard and seen in interviews and also people talk about him, Miller has definitely softened up a bit in the last, I would say, decade. Mm-hmm. But when he was in the 90s, I mean, that was peak Dennis Miller time.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
He was on, I think he
Top
was
of the
on
world.
he was on the sports at that point. He was doing his comedic stand-ups. He was on HBO special. Like, the guy was definitely on top, as you said. And what fascinates me with Demon Knight was he was a pick that was offered $1 million to do it, which was unheard of at that point. And it's so crazy to go back and listen to that show, especially about that, because if Dennis Miller would be replaced in this movie, I don't know if I would love it as much, to be honest. Even though he's such a prick in regards of the behind the scenes, which I'll get into in a second, I like him in this role, even though he is phoning it in hardcore. And that makes sense because, to give you perspective of Dennis Miller in this film, Birdman mentioned that this has a beautiful release, as I mentioned, from Shout Factory on the Scream Factory label. So Enrique and I were watching this, probably 5, 6, 7 years ago at this point. And I had just gotten those releases in. And we specifically wanted to watch Bordello of Blood because we'd seen Demon Knight 1,000 times. I love Bordello of Blood, and Hen was always kind of soft core on it, like soft feel on it. So he was like, yeah, let's watch Bordello, this is also the man who 2, 3, and Jaws the Revenge come out the same day on Blu-ray. I get them in the mail, and Henrik and I are supposed to hang out this day. And I'm like, I'm coming over. We're supposed to go see The Conjuring 2. Conjuring 2 is sold out, so we go back to his house, and he's like, all right, let's watch one of the Jaws the Revenge. You have 2, 3, and The Revenge to watch, and this man picks The Revenge. That is the kind of man he is, and he can tell you all about his love for The Revenge, which he has turned on me. That is not the point. I digress. So we watch Bordello of Blood, and at the end, we're like, yeah, that's really not a good movie, but man, it's fun. And I love Enrique because we can always go over the special features, like specific ones that we want to watch. And so we put on the documentary, and we're noticing that they're talking to Corey Feldman. They're talking to Erica Elionak. They're talking to Angie Everhart. And I think they're talking to a couple other people that I can't think of right now. But Dennis Miller's not in it. Gil Adler's not in it. Al Katz is not in it. And it's kind of like, okay, there's clearly some issues with this movie, which is specifically noted in this documentary, this short documentary on this disc, because Dennis Miller was offered $1 million. At this point, he really did not give a fuck. And that is evident in Corey Feldman's interview, where he states that he was excited to work on this project. He loved Tales from the Crypt as a kid, because who wouldn't? So he calls Dennis Miller, and he's like, hey, I didn't know if you wanted to, go over the script a little bit, and we could, do some scenes back and forth. And he's like, yeah, what do you think of this movie? And he's like, I'm excited about it. He's like, yeah, I think it's crap. And, yeah, I'll see you on set, but we're not going to hang out. So he then proceeds to say that Dennis would come to the set reading a newspaper when the crew was like, hey, Dennis, how's it going? Crew are nice on sets. They're great people. I say that because I'm a crew on Enrique sets a lot. So crew are nice people. And they're like, hey, Dennis, how's it going? And he was like, yeah, fine. And just read his newspaper. He would request to be shot out. So that essentially means that even though they have these scenes scripted for this day and the actors are on set, he would want to be filmed one-on-one, so he could basically go back to his hotel and fuck off. And unfortunately, as you find out if you listen to How Not to Make a Movie, they had to abide by it because Joel Silver was in love with Dennis Miller, and there was no getting rid of Dennis Miller at that point. And in my honest opinion of the movie, he's not good, but he works to a point where, and tell me if I'm wrong, Birdman, but it's almost like once you know how things were and know Dennis Miller, he's definitely being Dennis Miller, but at peak level that he can do and just get away with it, but it works.
Yeah, he's, I would describe his role as very flippant.
Yeah.
He's reacting in the moment, and there are some times where you see a little bit of what he can be shine through, but not too often.
Not too often.
But the thing is, though, if he didn't deliver this performance specifically, I don't think this movie would work in the way that it needs to.
Same.
You need that flippant attitude. I can't think of anybody else you could stick into this from that time who was a stand-up comedian who had the physicality to pull stuff off and could make ridiculously scary scenes seem stupid.
Well, it's if you so by going off of that idea, let's think about popular 90s stand-up at this point, or just popular 90s comedians. You got Drew Carey,
Jerry Seinfeld.
You've got Tommy Boy himself, Chris Farley.
Yeah.
A little bit of Dave Chappelle, Martin Lawrence, Adam Sandler. And it's like, even, I mean, anybody you put in that role. I mean, Andrew Dice Clay. I mean, shit, we can keep going.
I could, if you tweaked the script a little bit, I think you could honestly put Martin Lawrence in here because he has that ability to improv on the spot.
Yeah.
I could see that working. And if you reduce the physicality and let him be a little more mouthy, I think in the multiverse that exists out there right now that Kang the Conqueror is not yeeted, I could see a George Carlin version of this. And I say that because it's the verbal quips and jabs delivered. And you do see a version of a snarky, I guess, reactive person when Kevin Smith casts him in Dogma.
This is true.
I could see that working. Someone out there screaming at their computer, but think about it. If you just need someone to react off of scenes, Carlin could do it because he's a master at it. Lawrence is smart enough to react in the moment, but Miller delivers this, like I said, it's very flippant, very matter-of-factly, going through the motions, but it pushes the scene forward.
It does, yeah.
And Feldman, I can tell he's having the time of his life because at this point in his career, he wasn't doing anything spectacular. Like he'd already been, I hate to say he'd already been has-beened out, but he wasn't getting the calls that he thought he should have. And that's fine. That guy's had some issues in his life and
absolutely.
Whatever. Even the villainess of this movie, Angie Everhart, again, not an actress by trade at this point.
I'm going to say this real quick. Rewatching this today, I think she's a lot of fucking fun in this.
Yo, yeah, she has some really great moments where she's just kind of playing with the camera, and I think the director said, "Okay, try it your way, and let's see what happens." I have a feeling, much like Miller, she was given a lot of leverage to do what she wanted. And probably because of who she was dating at the time. But it works. It's not so offensively bad or anything. It works.
I think it's important, though, to understand that Birdman and I have mentioned How Not to Make a Movie podcast many a times in this episode alone. Basically, the gist of why Bordello of Blood is the way Bordello of Blood is the budget was a $2.5 million production for a screenplay by Robert Zemeckis that the studio had bought and had to make. They basically gave them this script that was about a vampire brothel, even though the original idea that was pitched to them, and going back to the releases of these movies, Demon Knight, if you have one of the earliest copies, has a point in the end credits where the Crypt Keeper will pop his head in, or it's just a voiceover, I can't remember, and he says, "Look for Dead Easy coming next year." That was going to be the next Tales from the Crypt film. It was Demon Knight and Dead Easy. And Dead Easy was a really good screenplay that Al and Gil have raved about. There was a great little podcast they did that was a benefit that was a live reading of the script. And then the studio came to them and said, "Hey, you're not doing Dead Easy. You're going to do Bordello of Blood. It's a Robert Zemeckis script he wrote in college. We're going to do this. Here you go." And this script wasn't finished. They had to finish pieces of it, in a sense, because they had the writing background from Children of the Corn 2. They had wrote an episode of Freddy's together. So the team of Gil Adler and Al Katz had written together and were given a screenplay that was technically unfinished. They had to fill in parts, and they made a screenplay. And then you have the whole factor coming in that the studio gave them a $2.5 million budget, took them to Vancouver to film a horror film, which Vancouver is not a place to film a horror film because you have so many hours, but you have so many hours of nighttime.
True, yeah. X
amount of hours of nighttime, plenty of daytime, etc. I could go on and on about this podcast, but the story of the making of Bordello of Blood is so fascinating because once you know it, I think you just appreciate and love this movie more simply from the fact of the hard work that two guys put into it with everything against them, from an actor that was paid $1 million that didn't want to be there. One actor that so Erica Eleniak, let's talk about her real fast.
Mm-hmm.
Originally in the screenplay, do you remember the scene where Miller is in his little theater office and Eleniak pulls up that poster that's that porn poster?
Yeah.
So originally, that's supposed to be her character. Chubby, whatever it is supposed to be her character. That was an ex-porn star that has this background. Like, there was a lot more into the story of Bordello that's not on screen. But Eleniak, even though she had done nudity on her episode of Tales from the Crypt, which is a great one that I cannot remember the title of right now, but it has Breon James in it, and it's about this logging, this like lumberjack community where the head lumberjack and his wife, like, they are known as like a power couple, but it's known that she will flirt with any guy on the team. But if dude finds out, he'll beat the shit out of you. Really good episode. I don't want to go in further because there's a lot of spoilers. But anyway, Eleniak had done nudity on that episode. When Alan Gill had cast her, it was under the understanding of this whole change in the screenplay that was she was going to be this ex-porn star. Rafe ended up having kind of an infatuation with her. That kind of created the meh romance, whatever you want to call it. And that did not happen because once Eleniak got on set, she basically had sworn off nudity at that point. So now they had to change the script again. So again, going back to the cast, Angie Everhart, you and I, Birdman, agree. A lot of fun to watch, but yeah, you can see that she's more of a model versus an actress. Nothing against her. She's fantastic in this. But this is also Tales from the Crypt, Bordello of Blood. And yeah, she was dating Stallone at the time. And during filming, Stallone broke up with her through a messenger that was not him. A messenger that may or may not have came to set and told her, and they had to deal with that as well. There's so much behind the making of this film that makes me appreciate it so much. And the aspect of that, especially watching it today, is the violence in it. It is so ridiculous and almost constant.
Yeah, like when I was watching the final fight scene where the priest and Rafe are going through the bordello with the super soakers. By the way,
priest, played by Chris Sarandon, ladies and gentlemen.
Which is awesome. And I
So
didn't
good.
realize all that he had done when I just looked at his filmography. Like, I knew he was the voice of Jack Skellington. I forgot he was the cop from Chucky.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Cop and Chucky, Prince Humperdinck, the main vampire in Fright Night. I mean, Chris Sarandon at this point has done A, plenty of horror, but B, has made a name for himself in it. And he's so freaking good in this. I really like him in this.
Oh, yeah. Like, again, with all these Tales from the Crypt movies, they pull out all these wonderful performances. And the fact that, you know, the ending gets so ridiculously bloody and gory that at one point they blow one of the prostitutes in half and she's dragging herself across the carpet.
So let's talk about that scene for a second, shall we?
Yes.
So at one point, Dennis Miller and Chris Sarandon have to join forces, which, to give you perspective on their role in this movie at this point, they have been arch enemies because Sarandon definitely has the hots for Erica Eleniak's character, which is Catherine, and she works for him, and he's basically a Joel Osteen type. He is this mega preacher at this mega church, and you find out, though, that he has secretly been running the brothel because Phil Fondacaro, which is the guy that we see in the original the opening on the expedition that finds Lilith, they bring Lilith back to the States, and she runs this vampire brothel, turning women into vampires, and they kill sinners because basically, as Sarandon sees it in his eyes, they're doing God's work. So Sarandon is the one that has Lilith's heart captured by the key that they also just throw into the movie from Demon Knight, which is one thing that I fucking realized when I watched it with Enrique. I was like, wow, they never even mention really that the key is a big thing, except when Fondacaro holds it up and he's like, I have power over you. So these movies have a connection, and that's never even talked about, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, no, which means Jada Pinkett Smith's character Geraldine is dead.
Essentially, that's all you can. That's like literally all you can take away from it. So going back to it again, Chris Sarandon and Dennis Miller join forces at this point because the climax of the film is Sarandon comes to the brothel and he basically says, I want to join forces with you guys, but he doesn't. He's secretly come to blow the place the fuck up. So he comes inside and they don't let him. They don't believe him. Miller drives a car through the brothel, killing, let's talk about him real quick, McCutcheon. McCutcheon, who is played by, oh man, what is his name? 2 seconds here. He's
Aubrey
so
Morris.
good. Yeah. So this dude is so good, you don't even realize you've probably seen him before. Birdman, have you watched Clockwork Orange? Are you familiar with?
You know
it
what?
to a
I think I saw it once when I was in high school.
Yeah. So that's the number one credit listed on his IMDb page is known for Deltoid and Clockwork Orange. So he is the therapist / cop-esque guy that comes to Alex's house when he has just gotten back from really having a night of savagery, beating the homeless man, having the rape, like all that stuff. He's the guy that comes to check on Alex. And then he's also the guy that tells Alex, Malcolm McDowell's character, that he's going to jail because the woman that they assaulted ended up dying, which is what places him into that prison that becomes the Ludwig technique, and then Clockwork Orange happens. That guy, Aubrey Morris, is that role. So he's a very big staple in cinema just from that start. He's also in The Wicker Man, Life Force, My Girl 2. He's a great actor. And in this role, he plays the mortuary owner, which he is, but he's also the guy that entices the men to walk into the parlor, go into the coffin, and slip into the brothel. Because if you mention the Cunningham Wake, you get into this mortuary that has the brothel secretly underneath that Chris Sarandon's running. Aubrey Morris is McCutcheon in this film. He is a creep, he's comedic relief, and he is absolutely perfect in the role, once again, going back to the casting. So, Dennis Miller and Chris Sarandon have snuck into the bordello during, I guess, is it daytime? It's got to be it's nighttime. Yeah, it's right after they kidnap Catherine. So, it's nighttime at this point. So, the mortuary is closed, so that means the bordello is not open. So, the vampires are just lounging. They're having an off day. Miller and Sarandon sneak in with super soakers filled with holy water and begin to blast these women and vampires to where they explode in a fashion that only you can find in a Tales from the Crypt film, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's so over the top ridiculous, but it's so violent. At one point, before this,
it's hilarious. Oh
they
God.
find Corey Feldman at this power plant, and no wait, it's in this scene. Miller shoots through him, and he looks down. This sucks. And he dies. Like, it's so great, just the over-the-top violence in this movie. And they even cut like $750,000 from the special effects budget.
Yeah.
Imagine if that had still been on the screen when this had been done.
It's largely due to a gentleman's name that I cannot think of right now, and I feel terrible for not knowing it. But he's actually on the season 1 of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. Al and Gil called him and said, "Hey, what's the recipe for fake blood?" And he was like, "You guys want to fly me out and I'll help you?" Because again, being in Vancouver, you had the whole tax credit thing and the unions and everything. So specific workers and everything and set people also played into the fact of this movie's success as well. And I'm so upset I can't think of his name. Like I said, he's in season 1, but the fact that they used him as a fallback for this was a genius move, because he definitely did a lot of the effects and helped on the effects of the movie, which is another thing that this movie does have for it, the effects, there's not a lot of CGI in this. It's all practical.
Mm-hmm.
And I especially love the scene when you have Dennis Miller and Chris Sarandon running around with super soakers just blowing up vampire bordello women. Like, it is hilarious because they also set it to Ballroom Blitz by Sweet.
Which is a weird thing in the 90s, because that's the second scene I can think of that featured Ballroom Blitz outside of Wayne's World.
Wayne's World, yeah, which is Tia Carrera, and it is, again, just one of those things that I tie back to this movie. Every time I think of or hear Ballroom Blitz, I'm like, I think of Dennis Miller and Sarandon running around with super soakers blowing up vampires, but I also think of Tia Carrera rocking out. And
yeah.
I just really appreciate Bordello for the aspect of its insanity, absurdity, and I just appreciate the fact that we have it. Because listening to that podcast, you have to understand, dear listener, you have to understand that one of the things that makes How Not to Make a Movie podcast so special is that Gil and Al patched up a almost 30-year friendship that had been broken because of this movie.
I think that's one thing that I like really about the fact that podcast exists, just because these guys, they buried the hatchet and they became genuine friends, and you can hear it in their interactions on the show. It's like seeing, just seeing something get rebuilt. And that's not something you find too often in your personal life, where you can just rebuild a friendship after being apart for decades.
No.
So, like, it's something, guys, you should absolutely check out. Go watch the movie, which, like I said, you can probably still find the Shout Factory release if you look around.
And I mean, Peacock has both Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood right now.
Yeah, so go watch it. Go listen to the podcast. It won't cost you a thing, but it's totally worth it. I can't recommend it enough. Totally worth it. But
real quick. So the one thing that you made me think of by saying the podcast, it's important also because of the fact that they've contributed to our show, that I just want to give them a shout out as well. Dads from the Crypt is a Tales from the Crypt podcast, which are nearing the end of the final season, so I don't know what's going to happen to the show, but they are the reason that How Not to Make a Movie podcast happened. Dads from the Crypt was a podcast that started about 2 years ago. A group of dads that love Tales from the Crypt and horror in general got together and decided to do a rewatch of the series, including the movies and other ephemera that comes with it. And they brought Gil and Al onto the show to talk about Demon Knight. And they were like, hey, we're going to do Bordello of Blood soon. And they're like, or I think they actually just brought Al, maybe. I can't remember. No, actually, I think it was just Al. Yeah. And Al was like, listen, Jason, that is a podcast of its own. And that was the genesis of How Not to Make a Movie podcast. And I give Jason a shout out for the Dads from the Crypt podcast, because they have hooked us up with both giving us a really, really awesome first review of our first episode. On top of that, told me about Wayne Byrne, who did the book on the Freddy's Nightmares and the entire Nightmare on Elm Street series that we had on the show a few months back. So Dads from the Crypt gets a big shout out, because without How Not to Make a Movie podcast, that is kind of hard to figure out if I would love this movie as much as I do.
It definitely gave me an appreciation for what film crews go for, because my only experience with being on a film crew is college and some stuff afterwards. So just hearing what all these guys had to go through, obviously being a podcast producer, I know all the work that can go into producing a podcast and trying to wrangle guests and whatnot. Plus, it's cool the fact that they had so many people from the production come on to their show to talk about it. So again, fantastic stuff. So our final movie tonight, we're going to talk about, again, I didn't know existed till about a week ago. And this has its own story to it as well, because this didn't start out as a Tales from the Crypt movie. They just literally put a wraparound. So Dave, explain this to me.
So Ritual from 2002 is a Tales from the Crypt film that essentially was not meant to be a Tales from the Crypt film originally. It's not super clear on what happened. It was a planned release after Bordello of Blood, but due to the low box office takes of the film's references to the Tale of Trip franchise and the Crypt Keeper intros were not released until this film was on DVD, which Birdman can attest to. You can tell that was a rush job if you actually saw that version, which I hope you did.
I did. It's so
bad.
Weird. Yeah, like it seems like they filmed this in maybe a couple of takes and they just use stock footage of models.
Yeah.
Like, it's fucking bizarre.
It's strange because Dead Easy is, like I said, a script that was originally supposed to be Bordello of Blood. It was supposed to go from Demon Knight to Dead Easy. I'm not sure if Ritual was 100% the third planned film, but as what you can find on the internet for the most part, that is true. Ritual, though, is just a loose remake of I Walked with the Zombie, the Val Lewton film from 1943, which I actually watched today. I think it was the second time. I don't think it was the first, because I remembered things about it. So I've definitely seen it before, but I do not remember watching it. Watching it today, I remembered pieces of it where I was like, this is too specific to not have watched this before. And Ritual was a film that Universal was going to release as the trilogy originally. When Bordello of Blood had such poor return, they scrapped it. And the story of Ritual is you have Jennifer Grey. Yes, kids, Jennifer Grey from Dirty Dancing and Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Red Dawn. She is a doctor that, correct me if I'm wrong, Birdman, but it's got to be like a New York area, right?
Yeah.
And she is dealing with a very young patient that she has hope for with this new method. And the great Stephen Tobolowsky, who I love as both a character actor and just a person in general, because his podcast, I don't even know if it's still going now, the Tobolowsky Files, is so much fun to listen to. But he was a great character actor. You may remember him as the teacher in Freaky Friday. He is the one tenant in Single White Female. He's
Arrested Development, I think he's on.
Arrested Development. The man has a freaking resume that goes miles. He essentially is the doctor at this hotel, or at this hospital, apologies, that tells her that the treatment's not approved and she cannot do it. So Jennifer Grey decides to go ahead with the treatment and ends up killing a patient. Unfortunately, it may or may not be her fault, but because she used that method, they blame her, they fire her. So she is a doctor that is out of work now, and she finds out that as a nurse, she can go to Jamaica and find out what is going on with this disease that is particularly affecting this one guy that happens to be the brother of this estate on the Jamaican land. Long story short, something is happening where voodoo is back and people are feeling that they are living zombies, and some are dying. Some are completely unreceptive to anybody's touch, anybody's words, etc. And there's essentially a curse going on, and she has to figure it out.
Watching this movie, I was kind of surprised how much I liked it, but at the same time, it's just kind of
Fine.
there. Yeah, it's fine. And that's this movie's biggest problem, because it, again, has a fantastic cast. You've got Jennifer Grey, you got Craig Sheffer, under fucking appreciated actor, I might add.
Absolutely.
I first saw Craig Sheffer in Nightbreed, as I randomly rented that, because I know I talked about this last week. I talked about zip.ca. I rented Nightbreed and I loved it. I thought it was so cool. And then my wife had me watch a television show called One Tree Hill. And and he was in the first 5 seasons before his character was killed off. Sorry, spoilers. And again, really, really like him. It's also got Tim Curry, who's clearly phoning it in, but having a fantastic time too.
Listen, Birdman. He kisses a cat's head on camera.
Do not
talk shit about Tim Curry. I am also the man who owns the Tim Curry album Fearless on vinyl. I have a greatest hits CD of Tim Curry. I have a lot of his filmography. I'm literally staring at a painting in front of me right now that's Tim Curry as Pennywise. So we like Tim Curry in this house.
Oh, hey, I love Tim Curry because he is KiloCon meat thing.
I know. You talked about KiloCon last, and so like Tim Curry to me is a reason to watch whatever the fuck it is. If he's in it, I'll watch it. If it's a video game where he's space, I'll play it. I can't help the fact that I love that man. So the fact that he's in this movie of Tales from the Crypt, but also just another one of those of guys that you kind of associate with horror to an extent as well.
Yeah,
Tim Curry is just he's the man. He's
yeah,
the
like
fucking man.
Like he'll do something if he finds the project interesting, and I would suspect, hey Tim, you want to go someplace really nice for a couple of weeks? Yes, that's how I picture that conversation going. But again, Jennifer Grey in this I really like her, and I was going back and forth in a Facebook chat with you guys at like 2:00 in the morning, and I was saying Jennifer Grey looks like two separate people, because I know she had a nose job at one point, and this isn't a crack at her appearance.
No.
But it's so radical from the Dirty Dancing being Baby to doing this, because I know there was a period of time where it was hard for her to find work because people couldn't recognize her. She didn't have that instant star recognition.
Yeah.
But in this, she's good, and she's clearly giving it her all. But the one actress I really like in this, and I was watching this last night, she plays Caro.
Yes. Okay. I'm so happy right now. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Kristen Wilson. I was like, where the hell do I know you from? Because she has this very distinctive face. And what I mean by that is she has the most gorgeous set of like blue eyes, or brown eyes, sorry. And I'm like, I know you. Where from? And I'm looking around my apartment, and I look at my D&D thing. I'm like, you're the Elven Ranger. And it totally took me by surprise. And then I forgot, oh yeah, you're the girl from Dr. Dolittle.
Yeah.
And just, it really hit me. And I'm thinking, okay, awesome. It also doesn't hurt that she's randomly naked for random parts of this. But just the fact that she plays a great character who turns out to be the main bad guy.
That is always one thing that I appreciate, because unless you know, like, and I've seen this movie probably 2 or 3 times now, unless you know, when she is revealed as the villain, it's both heartbreaking, but also like, holy fucking shit.
Oh yeah, because like, again, she forms such a good friendship with Jennifer Grey. It's quite literally shocking. And she just has this menace about her too, when she's about to turn the guy that plays she tries to turn Wesley into a zombie, and she reveals herself under this voodoo priestess outfit. Just this air of, I have you now, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well,
it's
and
great.
I also love the fact that her character, for the most part, is a super fun character to be around, and not just in the scenes where she's featured, even just in side character roles. I think that Kristen Wilson in this role as Caro really is a big reason I love this movie, because once she's revealed as the villain, it makes complete sense.
Yeah, like all of her motivations line up. Like, just like, again, this movie, it's fine. Like, the story is kind of but the performances are
I mean, I really appreciate the mystery of the story. Excuse me. I think that following along with the idea of I Walk with a Zombie being adapted into this works for both the performances of the people, also the atmosphere. Once we get to Jamaica, this movie's scary. This movie is 100% scary to me.
Yeah, like, there's so much about this that I appreciate. And I was wondering if they were going to do the oversimplification of voodoo, because that can be a very touchy topic, and you don't want to go into stereotypes too bad. But I like the way they portray it. I mean, it's no Serpent and the Rainbow.
Oh my god, I love that movie so much.
But it works. And like I said, Ritual, it's a fine movie. It didn't necessarily need the Tales from the Crypt addition to it, because it's like literally less than 2 minutes. It's a bad puppet job. I mean, I'm sure the puppeteers are doing their fine job. John Kassir.
If I may.
Yes.
So the Crypt Keeper is featured on camera, but the Crypt Keeper is
Doesn't
a
move.
very low budget original version of Crypt Keeper that they could get their hands on. That is why it does not move. That is why it only has eye and mouth movements. And that's also why we keep cutting away to beautiful women in swimwear the entire time of the 2.5 minute intro, where he just does Crypt Keeper puns. He talks about weed. He talks about rum, and then tells us the beast is yet to come. And then ritual, kids.
Yeah, like it's so awkward, and I can see why they did this. I mean, I would love to have been a fly on the wall during that meeting. Like, okay, we've got this movie. Clearly, we've got some stars in it. We need to make some of our money back. What could we snag this to? And it works. It's just not what I would have wanted. Now,
it's not what you expect after having the previous two films that are, I don't want to say over the top, but they are. But they're over the top to a point where it's accepted now.
They feel in universe.
Yeah, where back then, I think it's easy to call them B movies. Honestly, I hate to say that, but in a sense of probably how they were accepted, they kind of are.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it works. Whereas this one, it feels just out of sync with the rest of the series. This definitely feels more like if they're B movies, they are B movies as if made by their parent companies, which are huge. You know, I think it's Universal, is it?
Universal, yeah, Universal. Mom and Pop Shop Universal.
Whereas Tales from the Crypt Ritual feels like B movie by the way of Full Moon Entertainment.
So I think it's important to point out, though, Miramax and Dimension are the logos that open this film. Which, if you think about that, that was Clerks, that was The Talented Mr. Ripley, that was anything in regards of Dimension was Scream, Halloween H2O, if I remember correctly. Like, Dimension was one of those names in horror at that point that it was just like, okay, 2002, like, you're getting something good. So, yeah, why the hell would they not try to just attach Tales from the Crypt to it? You have your Crypt fans. You have people that love horror. You have people that know what Tales from the Crypt is if they're not fans, but just know that recognition. It's a genius move, which is why the more I watch this, even though, like I said, second or third time at this point, I'm like, no, I really appreciate this because it's not a bad movie, like you said.
Yeah, like it's like I said, its biggest crime is that it's fine, but it's definitely watchable.
Absolutely.
So as we begin to close out the show in the last couple of minutes here, I think it's about time we get a new Tales from the Crypt. It doesn't have to be super big budget. I'd like to see something along the same budget as the reboot Twilight Zone series that came out a couple of years ago, which I think was criminally underwatched.
Absolutely.
I would think if I were to put anybody in charge of this, obviously Crypt Keeper got to come back because that guy's still alive, John Kassir.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to... I think if you got the Blumhouse guys involved to give them the budget and to let them run wild with it, I think you could do something interesting. A Tales from the Crypt that was fully done by Jordan Peele, I think would be really, really, really awesome. Or alternatively, I would pick the guy from the Terrifier series.
You're aware, though, that for the last 5 years,
they've been trying to get it off the ground.
Do you remember who was attached to it?
It was Jordan Peele, wasn't it?
M. Night Shyamalan.
M. Night Shyamalan. Yeah, that's right.
There is a pilot out there that exists.
But no one's ever seen it except you're a Hollywood
I personally haven't seen it. I know for a fact it does exist. I don't know if it's one of those things that may or may not get uploaded. We'll find out.
Come on, Hollywood.
But at the same time, we have to mention in wrapping up this show that, yes, these are Tales from the Crypt films, but they're not the actual original EC Comics Tales from the Crypt films, which were in the 70s by Amicus, and you have Tales from the Crypt, and you have Vault of Horror. And those films, the more I watch them, which I've seen more than Ritual, I watched Tales from the Crypt 1972, I want to say, every Christmas because it has All Through the House in it, and it's just a very fun watch. Vault of Horror is one of those movies, again, early, based off EC Comics, based off Tales from the Crypt, a lot of fun. Tales from the Crypt has always been around in some aspect, and I think it's not uncommon for people to link Creepshow and Tales from the Crypt together because of the Crypt Keeper. But it's not the same Crypt Keeper. So, with you saying that we need another Tales from the Crypt series on, Creepshow on Shudder right now
is fantastic.
It's
almost
fun.
Always.
It's fun. It's like, I'm going to be honest when I say this. We just started watching season 4, Enrique and I, this past Sunday. And I full on admitted to him, I was like, this series is a little more hit or a little more miss than hit.
Agreed.
But I enjoy that we have it.
Yeah, like, I figure if we're going to do Tales from the Crypt again as a limited series, because you know it's going to get stuck to one of the streaming services, Max, HBO, whatever the hell you're calling it now.
But you say that, and Tales from the Crypt original is not available on Max.
Which is ridiculous. Like, that's a show, like, right now, if you want to draw people to your service, why was this not dropped October 1st?
I'm so pissed right now because so I have been a fan of Tales from the Crypt for a long time, the original HBO series. So when I was of the age of 16 or 17 on a vacation to Florida, again, going to flea markets with my father, I grabbed up at the chance because this guy at one table had seasons 4 through 7 for $50, and we're talking 2010 at this point. And I was like, here you go. So I come back from Florida with seasons 4 through 7. So all I'm missing is 1, 2, and 3. So, or no. Actually, I digress. He had 1, and it's in the most awkward phase that I've ever seen it, which is 2 DVD cases put together, where I've always seen it as the box. So I have Tales from the Crypt season 1 that is 2 full-size regular DVD cases put together instead of like the regular box edition that I find all the time. So I had 1 through 7 minus 2 and 3.
Oh, wow.
I think
I recall seeing them up here in Canada at one point pretty cheap, but I also remember them being just really hard to find for a number of years. I remember at college, I think I recall seeing them for sale at one point, and I'm kind of kicking myself in the ass I didn't buy them then.
Yeah.
But
I get it.
It is what it is, unfortunately.
But no, going back to that. So it's like, I have been a fan of Tales from the Crypt for a long time. So I had those DVDs. You saying the thing about why no streaming service has these. Fucking Vudu here in the US of A had them available at one point that you could buy them and own them in your digital library on Vudu. I distinctly remember them being on sale and being like, I'll get them eventually. As of right now, currently unavailable. You cannot fucking purchase those digitally anywhere. Luckily, again, physical media comes through. And I appreciate the fact that we have Creepshow because, you know, we still have that anthology horror that is based off essentially the original material. And I love that.
So, anthology horror, as we've talked about over the last couple of weeks, and, you know, anthology horror films can be amazing, and this sort of being adjacent to that is absolutely worth your time to check out. But
yeah.
So me and Dave were talking just before we got on air tonight, and we've decided what we're going to talk about next week. We're actually going to take a trip back to a more familiar genre of horror, the slasher.
Yes.
And we're going to watch a series that I've only ever heard about, starring the man himself, Bruce Campbell. We're going to be talking about the Maniac Cop series, all 3 of them. And that'll be on next Friday, just before we premiere the annual Twig Halloween special, which will come out on the 29th or so. And that'll be featuring Enrique and James Rolfe, the Angry Video Game Nerd. We'll be talking about Hammer Horror And then I should have some stuff with Aaron and Alex coming up in November. I have been in contact with JT and Ken about doing some stuff. We are currently working on some additional projects as we race towards Holiday Gift Guide as of this recording. Hopefully I'm done my Spider-Man 2 review. I should have my review code hopefully really soon. I should be done by now. We are reworking the role-playing show we are talking about. Botched Roll is going to be coming back at some point, where I just pick an RPG book and just talk about it for a little while. Not going to be as mechanically in depth as, you know, some of the other dudes you see online like Web DM, but I'm going to tell you, is this book great? Does it suck? Does it add something to your table? We'll be talking about that. I know me and Alex will be having more stuff for Future Imperfect with like Aaron. We got more stuff coming up for Loose Cannon in November. Our holiday gift guide will be airing on December 9th. We'll be doing another prototype on the Game Awards this year. I'm in talks with the Game Heroes, who have just recently come back to doing podcasts. I'll be doing stuff with Handsome Tom, hopefully sometime in the future. So keep an ear out for that. So for This Week in Geek's Loose Cannon, we have been
David Denoyer.
I've been Mike the Birdman saying, be kind, rewind. We'll catch you guys again next time right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
I love Scarnations. You'll be happy to know, kiddies, that Jerrilyn lived happily ever after. In fact, I even got a ghost card from her. She's traveling the world and having a fabulous time. As for me, I'm afraid I've got to hurry. Tonight's our big scream-in. Hello. The whole fan club is here. Hello, baby booby bubby. Uh-oh. I think my producers are trying to tell me something. Well, what do you know? I asked for Final Cut, and I got it. Now that's entertainment.
Are either one of these any good? Sir?
What?
Are either one of these any good?
I don't watch movies.
Quick! Change the channel!
You're wasting your life making shit! Nobody cares! These movies are terrible!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.